It's Saturday, July 15th, and it's 8:29 p.m. I am Teri Hendrich,
I'm Jack Cusumano.
and we thought we would do some mundane astrology around the current Hollywood labor strikes. And the reason why we're talking about this and why we have, I guess, some background on this is because we do work in the entertainment industry, and we're part of an IATSE Hollywood union. So we're very much tapped into the strikes that are happening. And in addition to that, we also both have studied astrology. I would consider myself a little bit more of a student of astrology still. I am nearing the completion of Austin Kopic's year one fundamentals of astrology course. And your background?
Yeah, so yeah, like Terry said, we work in entertainment, animation, television, but on the side, we're very interested in astrology. I actually spent some time getting certified as a Hellenistic astrologer through Chris Brennan's course. So yeah, between the two of us, I guess we have a decent knowledge of astrology.
Yeah, and as we kind of just between the two of us, we're kind of looking around the transits that were happening right now, and with the world events and the strike, there is definitely like interesting correlations that we just felt like compelled to share with others. So that's why we're making this recording, even though this isn't something we normally do. And the type of astrology that we'll be using is whole sign houses and the tropical zodiac. So I guess we can kind of start to get into it. I figured it's actually best to just touch briefly on some of the history involved here, just because this is the second time that both the WGA and SAG-AFTRA have gone on strike at the same time. And the first time that this happened was in the 1960s. And at that time, this first strike did start with the writers, and that was on January 16th, 1960. And almost 2 months later is when the actors joined in on March 7th, 1960. The actors at that time reached a deal just a little over a month since the beginning of their strike on April 18th of 1960. However, the writers continued their strike up until June 12th, 1960. So in total, the writers were on strike for about 6 months, while the actors just a little over a month. And I wanted to touch on that just because the astrology that we're about to get into does very much mirror that timeline for 2023. So now, before we get into bringing up charts, I did want to share what we feel are like the major players in this storyline of the strikes, and along with the astrology of it. So I made this little infographic that shows the planet and the glyphs for Mercury, the Sun, Venus, and Pluto. So I don't know if you want to give a little explainer of what each of those planets tends to represent.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, just keeping things simple for people. Mercury is pretty clear. I mean, I think people generally know Mercury has to do with writing and communication. Therefore, it's pretty easy to understand that could have a big hand in the writers themselves. Venus has a lot to do with aesthetics and things that would be connected to the arts, and therefore performers and actors and artists could be generally signified by Venus. The sun, since ancient times, would have been literally like representing the king. Still, you can use it as kind of a stand-in for a lot of authority figures, and especially male authority figures, because the sun being like a masculine kingly thing. So we wrote the patriarchy here as well.
And I think also, I didn't like note it on here, but I feel in this case with the strikes, the sun can very much be representative of the studios and CEOs.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty, I think it makes sense to use that there. Like I said, in the past, the sun would have been like literally the king. I think someone like a studio head, most of whom are males, could potentially be a solar figure. And then Pluto, Pluto is not a traditional planet, but I do find it really helpful. And in this case, it just very clearly seems to be playing a role. And Pluto, I think the key word for Pluto is just power. It's just, the deep-seated, like raw underbelly of power, and where the seat of power is located at a particular time. Versus like, the sun would be literally a figure. The Pluto to me is just generally just the essence of like the power.
Yeah, and with the charts that we'll bring up for anyone who's not as familiar with astrology, you will see other planetary glyphs, and we'll mention other planets and what's happening with them. But we felt like, at least with these four, it is notable to kind of remember what the symbols look like, because you can essentially transpose like what Mercury's doing with like the WGA and writers, and transpose Venus with SAG-AFTRA and the actors. So I would definitely keep an eye on those glyphs when we pull up these charts. So now I'll switch over to the first chart, which is May 2nd, 12 a.m. Based in Hollywood, California. This is when the WGA officially started their strike. And there is quite a few striking things happening in this chart. Notably, there is a Mercury cazimi happened that day. That's when Mercury and the sun were conjunct. Also, when this happened, Mercury was retrograde, and this was happening at 11 degrees of Taurus. Taurus is a Venus-ruled sign. Venus was in Gemini at that time, so that means Venus and Mercury were in mutual reception. Additionally, it is worth noting that Uranus was co-present in Taurus in this during this cazimi, and I don't know if you want to explain what Uranus's role could be.
Yeah, I guess we could have had a card for that one. Uranus is pretty easy to grasp, and just I think a handy visual for Uranus would be like a lightning bolt. People tend to associate it with the myth of Prometheus, and it's basically keywords for Uranus can be like sudden, quick, unexpected changes, surprises, upheavals. It can be associated with like revolution and uprisings, and just generally like wanting to break free, and kind of surprising, quick, revolutions or uprising or actions in pursuit of like breaking free, and kind of sparking something new, or I think that's that might help you understand Uranus.
And they're all in the sign of Taurus. So I don't know if you want to like explain what Taurus would.
Yeah, so like we said, it's a Venus ruled sign. We've already touched on Venus as it can relate to the arts, because Venus has to do with anything that's like aesthetically pleasing and pleasing to the senses. So like, we like art because it makes us feel things. But Venus in Taurus, also Taurus being an earth sign, it's a very sturdy, stable, down to earth sign that very often has to do with goods and resources and materials. So again, like I have a ancient astrology perspective, so I would think, oh, Venus and Taurus would be like expensive textiles or gold or silver, or technically copper is more of Venusian metal, anything of value, right? So if Venus in Taurus with Mercury in Taurus, all this stuff is talking about resources and value, and like what should we be paid, what are we worth. Venus has to do with like what do we value, and what is the value of something.
Right. And, and remembering going back to like that explainer card with that Mercury Cassini, it's like literally the writers and the studios have, met and have come to a head. And the fact that they are in a sign that's ruled by Venus does tip us off that Venus is going to be a major player when it comes to the story of these strikes. And another significant point or aspect that happened on this very day was that Pluto stationed retrograde in Aquarius. I can kind of click the chart and you can see that just the day before it was direct.
Yeah.
Here's Pluto. And once we go to the actual day of the strike, it began its retrograde.
Yeah, and just for anyone that's not used to reading charts, you see the numbers next to Pluto, there's a little 0 degrees. The numbers turn red when it's retrograde. So any planets with a red number next to them, like Mercury, for instance, will be retrograde.
And what would you, I guess, explain like things associated with retrogrades or what they mean? Like,
yeah, well, so from our perspective, if you're standing on the Earth and you're observing a planet that's we call it stationing retrograde when they begin the retrograde. So from our perspective, observing those planets, they appear in the sky to be slowing down and then stopping and then beginning to move backwards across the sky. So that's kind of how to interpret it, essentially, is like if the planet is slowing to a stop, the things to do with that planet may also be slowing down, grinding to a halt, ceasing to move forward, and then they begin to move backwards, which may be a lot of backtracking, reworking, redoing, etc., until it may, stations direct and then begins moving forward slowly, and it might slowly ramp up things having to do with that planet beginning to move forward again.
Yeah, and one other thing I wanted to note on this chart, even though Jupiter is not creating any aspects, I did want to just kind of pinpoint that Jupiter was at 26 degrees of Aries, and I feel like that's going to be significant later in this kind of chart progression that we'll see as we kind of move forward in time. I don't know if there's anything else you want to like note about this chart.
Yeah, I want to say with Pluto, so it's retrograde in Aquarius. Again, it's right at 0 degrees Aquarius. People that are not as familiar with astrology may not know the significance of that degree. So each sign contains about 30 degrees or 29 degrees. So 0 degrees means it's literally exactly right on the edge of being in Aquarius. It had only briefly been in Aquarius. I don't have the number off the top of my head. It had only been in Aquarius for like a couple months. And now Pluto, like I said before, denotes like power, right? Pluto's been in Capricorn for quite a long time. It spends about 20 years in a sign. Capricorn, another earth sign, has to do with like power structures and institutions, right? So it's pretty easy to imagine what a Pluto in Capricorn would be. The traditional power structures and institutions would be the seat of power. Pluto had just crossed over into Aquarius, and I think you all can probably think in your heads of when that happened. It was right around that time that all of a sudden everybody began talking about AI. Everything's AI this, AI that, and technology and AI and things like that became where it seemed like things are heading, and furthermore, where it seemed like things are kind of dark and scary and foreboding, which sometimes Pluto can feel that way. So Pluto moves into Capricorn. All of a sudden, AI has this huge spotlight. People are very scared of AI and confused and worried about the future of AI. And I think obviously that plays into these strikes. So it's really significant to me that Pluto stationed right on that degree of 0 Aquarius. Yeah. Do you want to mention anything else here? I mean, we did mention that Mercury is retrograde here as well.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know if also just the condition of Mercury that even though it's retrograde, that it's in mutual reception with Venus, so it's kind of actually like in a
That's typically a nice thing.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
like pretty well off, even though it's retrograde.
Sure. I mean, you would so again for folks that don't know what mutual reception is, so Mercury is currently in a Venus ruled sign here. It's basically under the jurisdiction of Venus. Venus is in a Mercury ruled sign, so they are both in each other's signs, so they both can kind of relate to one another and help each other out and work together more smoothly. I think another notable thing here is that the nodes, the North Node and South Node, they're kind of these squiggly black symbols in Taurus and Scorpio here were in Taurus and Scorpio at the time. So again, the nodes are there. That means those are the signs where eclipses are happening during that time, which is kind of an unstable energy of like fluctuation and changes. So that kind of adds a bit more instability along with Uranus into that Taurus Scorpio axis.
Okay, so we're going to jump ahead now in time. I'm going to move this chart forward by a month. And so let's see. So around this time, this is June 2nd. Actually, I'll skip to June 3rd. So on June 3rd, it was announced that the DGA had reached a tentative agreement with the studios. That was the Directors Guild. And I don't know if there's anything to note here, but just kind of letting you know kind of what was happening at this point in time, because there are some interesting things that kind of are about to show up on the chart. Let's see. On this day, June 5th, is when the actors, SAG-AFTRAs, announced the results of their strike authorization, which was a yes vote. And let's see it. Okay. Then on June 7th, that's when SAG-AFTRA officially began their negotiations. What's interesting here is by this point in time, Venus has now just entered Leo. And basically, as she goes into Leo, she will be entering her shadow period because this summer Venus will be retrograde in Leo, which is significant because Venus is not a planet that retrogrades very often. It's I think every like 19 months or about. So it's not every year. And let's see. Trying to think of the other significant dates. Well, yeah, as we move forward in time, we are about to see another Mercury Sun cazimi, and this happened in Cancer. I believe it was at the very end of, yes, on July 1st. So on that date, although I think it may have been exact on the day before, but in any case, right around this time is when SAG-AFTRA's deal originally was going to expire, but they decided to extend their contract up until I believe it was like July 12th. So continue to move forward in time. And definitely Venus is well into like her shadow period here. And now we arrive at July 14th. So this is the date of SAG-AFTRA official start date of their strike. And one thing that jumped out to me here was that Jupiter, the planet of like expansion and growth, and some people could interpret it as help from friends, has hit the 11th degree of Taurus. And if you recall on the chart that we first brought up when the WGA strike first began, that Mercury Sun cazimi happened at 11 degrees of Taurus. So I thought it was just very like meaningful that Jupiter is there when the actors strike begins, because it kind of helped to show that this strike that against the studios that began with the writers has now suddenly gotten way bigger. Like that's kind of Jupiter's role here.
Yeah, I think that's true. Yeah, it's like kind of both things. Number one, it's expanding. Number two, Jupiter being like generally considered a benefic is coming in to bring aid and help and assist, you know, with the effort. And it's, yeah, right at that same degree that initiated the writer's strike.
And I probably skipped over when it exactly happened, but you know, by this point in time, Pluto in its retrograde has now gone back into the sign of Capricorn, which I don't know if you want to touch on what like Capricorn
Yeah, I
has to
mean,
mean.
generally kind of like what I said before, just general shorthand, you could think of just the general institutions and, you know, power structures that exist. I don't know. I mean, it's more like you might imagine like, oh, like the halls of government and like, you know, corporations and banks and things like that to me are more Capricornian than,
Well, I think also
yeah,
I would associate like just reality with
sure. Yeah.
Capricorn versus Aquarius could be more like out
Yeah.
there.
And they're both, so Capricorn and Aquarius are both ruled by Saturn traditionally, and Saturn is, you know, a very heavy uh planet that has to do with material concerns. But in Capricorn, as an earth sign, it is much more grounded and literally concerned with very real physical resources and things like that. Whereas in Aquarius, the air sign, it's more of a mental thing. Hence, like why when Pluto popped into Aquarius, it was all AI, everything, because it's tech, it's you know, intellectual, like it's more airy. Yeah.
And you know, I feel like it's easier to understand what's happening, like literally with the strike, when you look, you know, look at these symbols and just think like, okay, Mercury is the writers and Venus is the actors and the sun is like the studios and the CEOs. And so right now the sun is in Cancer, so I kind of get this feeling that the studio execs are kind of just in their comfort zone, or you know, in their shells, while you know, the writers and the actors are in Leo, which is ruled by the sun, and like they're literally out in the sun in the heat of summer during the strike. And you know, basically the sun is kind of like I guess what you'd say, basically ruling the I mean Mercury and Venus here. So.
Yeah, I mean, I guess another general concept for folks that are more casual astrology observers, it's, and especially this is used a lot in ancient astrology. So each planet rules a particular sign. Any planets that are transiting through that sign, like we've got Mercury and Venus here, they're going through the sun's sign. So while they are there, they're kind of under the jurisdiction of the sun. They're kind of generally, you know, going to be trying to pursue like solar pursuits and topics. And, you know, some planets like or dislike being in a particular sign because of which planet is ruling it. Yeah, so I guess those are some general things to keep in mind.
So I'll go ahead and keep moving forward in time. So now this is getting into later in July, which well, it's around July 22nd that officially Venus will station retrograde. And again, if you can just imagine, like like here you see Mercury getting closer to Venus, and it's like literally the writers and actors like coming together, and the sun has now entered into Leo. So it is around, it's basically around July 28th. Yeah, I believe around July 28th or so, that the Mercury and Venus will be conjunct. And again, it's in Leo, ruled by the sun. But Mercury will be able to kind of escape at the end of July and retreat into Virgo, which is the domicile of Mercury, while Venus is still kind of there in Leo. Now, as she retrogrades, she's going to get closer to the sun, and when Venus is close to the sun, there's a term we use, like under the beams, and as it gets even closer, it's combust, and that basically means like the light of Venus has become obscured. So that means any themes around the planet of Venus are also like unclear. So there is this feeling that things with the actors are still not going to be clear here. But as they come to, as Venus and the sun come together in conjunction, you also get this feeling, okay, maybe the actors they're going to be actively negotiating around this time and trying to reach a deal with the studios. And I feel, okay, I know there's some other things I want to note as we get even further in this chart. I think it's going to be towards I'm going to check my notes again. Okay, yes, it's going to be towards the beginning of September that we're going to see some very interesting things. So so now at this point, this is towards the end of August, the sun will have entered Virgo. So now the sun is being ruled by that Mercury. So suddenly you get the sense that like maybe the tables have turned, that like the writers are kind of starting to steer the ship here. And Venus continues her retrograde up until, I believe it's September 4th. So you can see, I think it's officially, I'm not being very nuanced with this chart, but I believe officially it's September 3rd that she does station retrograde, or sorry, direct. And what I thought was also interesting here was that, well, literally the next day, then Jupiter stations retrograde. And remember, Jupiter kind of was there when the actor strike kicked off. So I do get this sense that like by early September that the actors could be reaching a deal here. And with the Jupiter now retrograde, that there's, removing themselves from the strike line, because like now they've potentially reached a deal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess one other thing, can go back to the day that Venus stations. Okay, that's close. It's not exactly by the degree. It's Venus is square 11 Taurus pretty tightly by 1 degree.
With
see, Venus is at 12 Leo, that squares 11 Taurus, which was the degree where the writer's strike kicked off.
Oh, right.
It's within a degree.
And I think and additionally, literally just a few days after that, this is now September 6th, there is another Mercury Sun cazimi, and this time it's in the Mercury ruled sign of Virgo. So I'm just getting the sense like, okay, maybe the actors have reached a deal and now it's back to like the focus is back on like the writers. But at this point, Mercury will be retrograde again. So there's still this sense of like, okay, they're still redoing things and reevaluating things. I don't know if there's anything else you see in the chart.
Let's see.
Oh, and I did want to note, yeah, that cazimi is happening at 13 degrees of Virgo, because I think we'll kind of see that touched on again.
But yeah, I guess it is notable, you know, if things are playing out the way that we're imagining here, yeah, at this particular moment, the sun being in Virgo would be again kind of subject to Mercury setting the terms, because this is Mercury's turf. Mercury is kind of in control in this time frame.
Right. So so even though like Venus is stationing direct here in Leo, it's being ruled by a sun that's ruled by Mercury.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, yeah, I do obviously our ideal outcome for this is that the writers and the actors get like the best deal possible. So again, yeah, with Venus and Leo, like hopefully Venus is still getting a great deal, and you know, the sun has left Leo at this point. It's in Mercury, yeah, under the Mercury's jurisdiction, essentially.
Okay. So yeah, if things kind of go this way, then the actors would potentially be striking for just over a month or so. I guess a month and a half, I guess, since it will have began on July 14th. So, you know, if we continue jumping forward in time, I think maybe I'll go, let's see how far I want to go. I guess I can go by a month. So by early October, Mercury and the sun will now be in Libra, which is a Venus ruled sign. But the sun does not like being in Libra. I don't know if you can explain why.
Yeah, I mean that sign. So this is considered what you would call the fall of the sun. Planets have particular signs where they, you know, they rule those signs. That would be the domicile. They have signs where they are considered exalted. That's where they're, you know, also especially empowered. The sun is exalted in Aries at the opposite end of the chart from Libra. And so opposite of Aries, the sun is in Libra, which is its fall. And you know, there's some symbolism with why the sun is at its fall there. I believe it's something along the lines of like those are when the day begins to be shorter than the night. Like the period of the day where the sun is shining is shorter than when it's dark outside. So the sun is beginning to be like weakened in that time of the year. That's the logic of the tropical zodiac of why the sun does not like Libra essentially. But you know, all you need to know is sun in Libra, generally weak and not empowered to do what it wants, and also under the control of Venus, which we already mentioned has a lot to do with the arts and artists and probably the actors themselves here.
So as we move forward in time, more into October, so I'd keep an eye first on Pluto over here in Capricorn. So this whole time it's been retrograde, but right around I have October 10th officially it will station direct in Capricorn. So you kind of get this feeling like suddenly it's going to be moving forward again. Things have been reevaluated, maybe with the plutocracy, I don't know. And over here in Libra, Mercury is getting closer to the sun, and now Venus has entered Virgo. So again, just like when the strike began, there's a mutual reception here happening between Mercury and Venus. So just a few days later, it's, I believe, around October 19th that we'll officially have another Mercury Cazimi. This chart's a little strange, but the Sun and Mercury here are at the 26 degrees of Libra. And so there's lots of interesting things, I think, happening on this day. Notably with that Cazimi at 26 degrees, if you recall, the very first chart that we brought up was when the strike began, Jupiter was at 26 degrees of Aries. So in terms of like a natal transit, like this Cazimi is opposed to that Jupiter natally. And let's see. I know there's a few other things I want to like
Well,
note
I
here.
guess I would note. So again, if like hypothetically, if this is a day when we're getting a deal, I think it's nice that Mars has left Libra. I don't know if you noticed a couple days earlier, Mars was co-present in Libra with the Sun and Mercury, and also that South node.
And Mars is a malefic.
Yeah, oh yeah. So shorthand, Mars generally malefic, could be combative, unpleasant, aggression, whatever. It's something unpleasant there. This chart looks nice because Mars has left Libra, and also now Mars is in Scorpio, where it's in domicile. It's going to be much more friendly in Scorpio and helpful in Scorpio. Also, we mentioned way back when the strike kicked off, the nodes were in where were they? Taurus and Scorpio. Yeah, Taurus and Scorpio. If you look closely now, the South node has shifted over to Libra, where all this action is happening with the Sun and Mercury. The nodes are now in Libra, Aries. Again, that means that's where the eclipses are going to be happening. It means there would be some eclipses happening during this general time frame of the Sun transiting through Aries.
Actually, let me go back a few days because I did miss that. So right around, I believe, October 14th or so, there will be a solar eclipse. So literally the light of the sun is getting obscured. And I know I was taught in my astrology classes that the condition of a planet's light very much is like literally says what is happening in terms of what it represents. So it's literally like the power of the studios and the CEOs is getting like obscured here, and also afflicted with that south node. So once that Cazimi happens between Mercury and the Sun, the Sun is very much debilitated here. Like it's not in a sign that it likes. Its light is being afflicted with the south node. And I know also what you would explain what the south node would signify. Like
yeah, there's a few ways to look at it. But one, again, general shorthand. Well, first of all, the nodes are generally destabilizing points in a chart. Those are the spots, again, where the eclipses happen. In ancient times, it would have been pretty shocking and frightening to see, the sun or the moon disappear, for instance. And it's easy to imagine how these are kind of like intense destabilizing points where things shift and things can change rapidly or turn, so the fact that the nodes are in these particular signs, it means there's going to be a lot of change and upheaval and shifting and evolving happening in those topics and those places. I don't love that the south node is pretty tightly like conjunct
Mercury.
this Cazimi here. I mean, for what it's worth, it's is it separate? I mean, the nodes are retro. Oh, whatever. Nodes move backwards. So if it's retrograding, it's probably actually moving toward the sun. I don't love that, but it might also just be signifying, hopefully, best case scenario is that it's just a really transformative shift happening here with this deal. I mean, that's what is needed, obviously, because things are just so far behind the reality of what people need in this industry right now, that, you know, pretty like remarkably revolutionary deal would be needed to address all of the bad things happening at once. So hopefully, best case scenario, that the nodes being there is just like showing that this is a really significant like change and sort of upheaval and yeah, thing happening.
Well, and I mean, just also just the South Node are things like you cannot hold on to, like
Yeah,
it's letting go.
sure. Yeah, so it would be nice if it's like jettisoning and ejecting all this baggage of stuff in these contracts is just totally not functioning in our current reality, because it's just left over from ancient times that do not reflect the industry as it exists today.
And also maybe it's worth describing like Venus in Virgo, like she's kind of primed to be like going over details and like writing contracts in that sign. So I mean, overall, like what we're seeing, like the astrology in these like just kind of essentially like week and a half time span, it to me is saying like things will be pretty much hopefully resolved when it comes to the writers and their strike. And another significant point I thought was on around October 23rd, Venus will reach the 13th degree of Virgo, and earlier in our chart progression, that was when the Mercury and the Sun had a Cazimi earlier in time. So you kind of get this feeling like that kind of the negotiations like have now maybe reached a harmonious point. I think, and that was another part with the fact that Cazimi is happening in Libra. I mean, Libra is all about bringing balance and harmony to the world. So
yeah, I mean, you know, the glyph is literally meant to be the scales, like balancing the scales. I guess one more thing to point out that we haven't mentioned is Venus in Virgo is considered to be in its fall, so that's typically not like the best place for Venus to be, but like we said before, it was in mutual reception with Mercury, so that's actually like a helpful bonifying kind of condition to actually help that Venus be a bit more comfortable and functional while it's in Virgo.
right. So yeah, I think it's kind of as far as we kind of went with the charts.
Yeah, if there's anything else worth pointing out. I mean,
I remember, there was something happening with Jupiter,
well,
but I forget when that happened.
It is like within a degree again of that 11 degrees Taurus. It's retrograding back toward 11 Taurus here within a degree, for whatever that's worth.
I feel like it might have been around the Venus station, if I can find it. Venus station. Okay, early September. So potentially if the actors were to reach a deal around this time. Okay, yeah, I think that was when I noted that I think Jupiter and Venus are square.
Pretty close. So, okay.
I mean, within 3 degrees.
Yeah, I mean that's within orb. Yeah,
and I know you were saying something. Yeah, they're applying.
I wanted to make sure they're applying to one another. Can you move that ahead a day or so? Okay, this is
because then Jupiter retrogrades back.
Jupiter will retrograde back towards Venus, so I think they're technically applying here, so that's good. And Jupiter's in the superior position in the chart, so it's like an overcoming square, so it's a pretty strongly like connected kind of aspect there. And the moon's also kind of triggering that Jupiter as well, by passing by.
Right. So there is a feeling like if the actors were to reach a deal here, it would hopefully be good overall.
Yeah, hopefully that Jupiter square and then the sun not being directly in Leo, setting the terms there. Yeah, and even the moon's kind of, again, kind of triggering or amplifying that Jupiter square. Yeah, we'll see what happens. I mean, obviously, I want this stuff to wrap up way faster than this. Yeah, we were optimistic about some of those early July transits, but it seems like they just kind of denoted things like the, extending the contract briefly, and then like the strike beginning with the actors, rather than everything resolving, which would have been
Yeah,
yeah.
that was my initial hope when I kind
Mhm.
of pulled up the chart. But now that time has progressed a little bit more, I feel like we can look at things a little more
Yeah,
clearly
zoom out a bit.
in terms of the astrology. But yeah, I do think it's interesting if things really do play out this way, the idea that the strike would start with a like Cazimi and a Venus ruled sign, and there's a mutual reception happening with Venus and Mercury, which you can say is like the writers and actors. And then potentially if this does go on into like mid-October, that like literally it's like almost
Like
this
a
a reflection of that, but this time Mercury will be direct. And again in a Venus rule sign in mutual reception. So yeah, that's why I think because of all those correlations, that's why to me it's like, okay, it seems pretty likely there would be kind of an end to this story by that time. And you didn't know like it does, like if it is like mid-October, mid to late October, that the writer's strike does wrap up, that it does unfortunately align with that kind of leaked kind of a plan from the studio execs saying they were going to wait until October until they were going to meaningfully try and reach a deal. So yeah, based on the astrology, that might actually be the time frame. And touching back on the 1960s strike, if this were to play out the way we described, then that would mean that we would be looking at a 6-month long writer's strike, and with the actors having struck right in the middle for about like a month and a half.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't want it to go that long. But if it does go that long, and clearly, the studios have made it seem like that's their intention, with the goal of putting the writers in such a bad position that they have to just cave and give in to all the studio demands. It looks like if that's the time frame, that really, and if we're correct in like using the sun as a stand-in for like the CEOs and execs and stuff, that like the sun will be in a really poor condition in that time frame. So basically it seems like if they take that tactic, they are really hurting themselves, and the sun will be in a much worse position than Mercury at that time, and Mercury and Venus will be setting the terms of the deal over the sun.
Right. Yeah, I almost imagine like by mid or October with the sun in Libra and that Cazima, it's like the studios are on like have been cut down to their knees, and like they don't have a lot of power at that point.
Yeah, that's what it looks like. If that winds up being the time frame of it.
Right. So I guess that's most of what we wanted to touch on. And I guess it might be worth just giving a shout out. The software we used with that chart was called Luna Astrology. And I don't know if you want to give any like plugs, anything.
I guess Chris Brennan's astrology course, and Austin Kopic's astrology course, if you guys want to learn more, or like the astrology podcast, where both of those astrologers are able to be seen and heard from regularly.
Yeah. And our profession is like we're artists, so if you want to follow us anywhere, you can find me on social media at Color Sorceress. And I mainly do paintings, but I am currently working on a project that it revolves around astrology that I'll be releasing early next year. So if you want to follow me, you can hear when I release that.
Yeah, and I guess if you want to see some of my like animated shorts, you could go to Jack Cusumano Animation at Instagram, and yeah, follow there.
All right, I guess that's everything then. Thanks for listening, and hopefully things will all turn out for the best.
Mhm.
All right.